Good morning, Cowboys Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the Writer's Block podcast. We're coming to you on this Tuesday morning, the final day of 2024. And what a year it's been. What a year we're ready to say goodbye to as Cowboys fans as we come here to talk about the Cowboys coming off a pretty awful loss. I'm your host, David Howman, joined as always by Brandon Clements, here to break down everything that happened on Sunday. But more importantly, turning the page, talking about New Year's resolutions, because good God, none of us want to talk about what happened this past Sunday. So with that being said, Brandon, how are you doing? How was your Christmas? Last we heard from you, it was Christmas Eve. Did you get any good we know that Santa didn't do anything for the Cowboys, but did you get good presents for you personally and for your family?
Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost, hope everybody out there, all of our listeners, you as well. Hope everybody had a safe, healthy, and a tremendous holiday, Christmas. Whatever you celebrate, it's the season, so to speak. So, I hope everybody's doing good, including yourself. The Cowboys, lump of coal. That's what they got. Santa said, "Yeah, here you go. Here's a lump of coal. Take it for what you will." It's been a great stretch. Since we were last on, I've been very busy. When I got two little girls, 5 and 2, and let's just say I'm doing some. You can't see it behind me, but I have my fan cave is what I call it, and half of my fan cave is not a fan cave anymore because of all the toys that they got for Christmas. So it's a half fan cave, which is where I'm at. But if you go past, there's a stairs behind me. You go on the other side of my fan cave. It's now more of an additional play area because I don't have enough room in my house for millions of toys that we got, Santa got, grandparents got, aunts got. Like it's crazy. The girls had a blast. We just did Disney on Ice here locally, so they've had a blast. For me, just watching them open gifts and just being as happy as they are and being healthy, that's the greatest gift of all. For me personally, I got to since we talked last, it was a little bit after Christmas, of course, but Syracuse football ended on a high note. They beat Washington State in the Holiday Bowl, and they finished with 10 wins, which, by the way, I will go on record and say I called it. You guys all, you and Chris, our great friend Chris Holling, you guys rolled your eyes when I said we'd win 10 games this year, and guess what? They did. So thank you. I'm gonna pat myself on the back. So that was pretty good. I also said Kyle McCord will be in the conversation for Heisman, and technically he was. He was in the top 10 this year. So I'm back. Hey, he still was in the conversation.
He wasn't in New York.
He wasn't. Technically, he wasn't. Either was Scadaboo, but nonetheless, it was. It's been a good stretch. I did get all everything that my wife wanted for Christmas. She got, so she was pretty happy. For me, I'm simple. I just like some cash and go spend it on myself. So a lot of gift cards, a lot of cash. Socks. Boxers, you name it. The usual stuff that we've talked about on previous episodes. I can't complain. It was a heck of a season. How about you?
It was good. As we know from the last episode, I went back home to Arizona, and I'll tell you that place, as far as like the college town scene, the ASU, Sun Devils, like it is jazzed up. People are excited. Of course, coming to you this Tuesday morning, we are a day away from the Sun Devils blowing out the Texas Longhorns in the Peach Bowl and moving on to the semifinals of the college football playoff. So just be ready for that. We're all excited. Scadaboo got snubbed, not getting an invite to New York. He got more votes for Heisman than Kyle McCord, which is not surprising to me because he's the better player. All due respect to Mr. McCord.
I knew that was coming. Hey, McCord already broke the record for passing yards at the ACC. I'm just saying. So that was a heck of a year. I'll just say this: both our guys had heck of a year.
If Scadaboo was playing quarterback, he'd probably have broken that record too. People forget last year he threw quite a few passes for ASU operating out of they call it the wild scat formation because Arizona State's not going to call it Wildcat. That's our rival. But he threw a lot of passes, and he completed a good chunk of those passes. So whoever gets
multi-talented,
whoever gets him in the NFL, hint, hint, Cowboys. You're getting a guy who can do a lot of different things for you. While I was in Phoenix, though, as good as it was to see family and friends, I did, if you can't tell from my voice, I got a little bit of a cold. Of course, my luck, I leave the Midwest to go back to the desert and somehow get a cold. How that happens is beyond me. Also, how the Cowboys go out and get blasted like they did against the Eagles after all the improved play we saw, that's also beyond me. I was beside myself watching this game, and then as I sat on it and thought on it and looked back over the game and how things unfolded, honestly, it didn't hurt as much as it did watching it live, because it always sucks to lose to the Eagles. But I mean, you look at the first quarter of this game, Cowboys were in it. I mean, it was 7-7. The defense forced back-to-back 3-and-outs to start the game. Kenny Pickett, the ball like turned into Thor's hammer in his hand, and he like had that weird play where he like kind of fumbled it, didn't really like. It looked like, aside from that pick six from Cooper Rush, it looked like this was a game the Cowboys were going to win in the same fashion they had won their previous few games. But in that second quarter, you've got that Jake Ferguson fumble, you've got the Jonathan Mingo incomplete where he took a deep shot and Mingo thought it was going to be out in front of him. It was a back shoulder. Neither, like, they weren't on the same page.
Yeah.
And then Cooper Rush's second interception, which I think he was trying to do an arm punt, but then they returned it 25 yards, so it didn't even work out. Just a couple of small plays here and there that all broke the Eagles' way and helped them to suddenly go from 7-7 to 24-7 at half. And at that point, I mean, you could kind of tell in the second half, the Cowboys, they were still in it. They were still playing and fighting, but you know that they know at that point they don't really have a shot coming back in this game. But that second quarter, I mean, just out of nowhere, things just snowballed really, really fast. And that's how the Eagles have beaten a lot of teams this year. So I personally, after I thought on it longer, I didn't feel as down about the loss. I also don't think that it really changes any of the conversations we've been having about this team. The last few games where they've played much better, that's still real. The overall of this season where they have not been a very good team is also still very real. And also not having CeeDee Lamb really, really hurts, as we found out.
Yeah, 100%. Well, it also doesn't hurt, or it doesn't help things when you're when you're having 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles, so 4 turnovers versus Philly's 0. That, I mean, that Thor Hammers play that you mentioned, I was hoping that was going to be a turnover. It was just so ugly. But I mean, nonetheless, I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, a team like Philly, who right now obviously is 13-3, you can't lose the turnover battle 4-0 and expect to win the game. This is a product of that 41-7 defeat. I mean, Rico fumbled. I mean, Jake Ferguson had a bad fumble. Rush, some people might not give, I know you called it like the arm punt, so to speak. I don't like it. I mean, go do something else with the ball. Like, clearly, like, there's nobody open there. Like, try to go do something else. Maybe throw it underneath. Maybe a guy breaks a tackle, gets the first down, whatever the case may be. I don't like the phrase arm punt. I did see that on social media. It really did backfire, because I think they got the ball, the Eagles, at like the 35-yard line, versus even if Anger didn't pin it deep, it goes to the touchback. It's at the 20. So I mean, that's there's
plus
15.
They had 2 timeouts.
Exactly. The whole thing was bad. I mean, obviously Cooper Rush, I don't know what it is. He just doesn't play well against the Eagles. It just is what it is. It wasn't a good game.
I saw something on Twitter during the game that said, my new theory is Cooper Rush is specifically green colorblind and he can't make out Eagles jerseys.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense.
I will tell you though, I mean, I know we mentioned Rico with the fumble. Other than that fumble, he was the best player on the field for the Cowboys. I mean, 23 carries, 104 yards. I mean, another 100-yard game for Rico. I mean, he played some quality ball, minus the 1 turnover, which, if you actually go back and watch it, it was a freak thing anyways, because the way he got hit, the ball kind of like Slade was just there at the right time. Like, he ran, I don't know who he ran into, but I just saw Rico's arm kind of come loose than it normally does. Like, he got hit just right, and his arm came loose for a split second, and Johnny on the spot, Darius Slade, was in the right place at the right time, saw the ball kind of go, like, kind of come open a little bit, and that's where the punch came out. I don't think it's a ball security problem for Rico. Rico's been pretty stable with the ball. He knows how to keep it pretty tight to his body. So I think it was more of a freak thing. So I'm not upset about it. I'm not saying let's cut him after one fumble kind of a thing. I'm not saying we need to go top 15 at running back. I know Gentie's one of those guys that people like. I mean,
He's not
Rico
Cam
just
Scatterbo.
Cam Scatterbo. I mean, that's one. I mean, there's a long list, which obviously we'll get to as in the coming months before the draft. But going back to Rico, congrats to him. He did something that nobody else has done in Cowboys history, and he's the first undrafted player to break 1,000 yards in a single season in Cowboys history. So, Rico, congrats, my friend. We're happy for you, and hopefully we'll get you some extra money in the old bank account for next season with the Cowboys.
Yeah, he's going to be making a lot of money, a lot more money next season than he was this year. That's for sure. Don't know if it'll be in Dallas. Of course, he's a free agent after this year.
Yeah.
And the Cowboys have quite a few players that are going to be free agents after this year. One of them also being Kevontae Turpin, who I thought had an interesting game. In this one with CeeDee Lamb out, they moved him up to wide receiver 2 status, which is kind of crazy because, a year ago they were saying, well, we might play him on offense a few times here and there. And now he's like, obviously he's not, you don't plan on him being your wide receiver 2, but I mean, that's still a pretty big deal for him to be called up there in that point. They also used him at running back. He had a couple of nice runs there. And we know what he is for the Cowboys in the return game, and they're going to have to make a decision with him, Osa Odighizuwa, Chauncey Golston. I mean, plenty of other guys, Brandon Cook, Zach Martin, DeMarcus Lawrence. I don't think his contract is technically up after this year, but it's kind of structured in a way that they're making the decision on him one way or another. So there's a lot of things that could change with the Cowboys roster. And then obviously there's a conversation about Mike McCarthy, Mike Zimmer, the contract situation, all of that. It's going to be a fascinating offseason. But before we get into any of that, and before we spend any more time talking about that horrible performance on Sunday, it's New Year's Eve. We've got New Year's resolutions. I think it's a timely tradition of making resolutions, making plans that obviously everyone sticks to. Nobody gives up after a week of the new year. And so Brandon and I have our own set of New Year's resolutions for the Cowboys that we want to see in the 2025 season as we turn over our calendars. Brandon, we kind of see eye to eye on this first one. Mine's a little bit different than yours, but in the same general ballpark. What is your first New Year's resolution you want to talk about?
Yeah, for me, it's the running back position, and I know I just kind of hinted at it. Ashton Genty would be somebody to look at, but we're gonna be breaking that down later on between now and the draft. So I want to focus more on what we have in house currently and potential free agent additions that will be available into the 2025 the spring of 2025. So coming up here in the next few months. There's one name that does intrigue me. I know you're going to roll your eyes at this one because I don't. If I remember correctly, it's either you or Chris, but you're not a big fan of this particular running back. But I think here's how I look at it. You bring Rico back. That's one. When we're not talking about the draft, let's just focus on what we have here. So if we can get Rico back, I think a really good compliment to Rico, and I think they would be good for each other, would be a guy like Najee Harris. I think he can get. I don't think he's going to get as big of a contract as people may think. I think he can be one of those options where him and Rico could split carries and kind of mitigate the workload a little bit, and and do that. And Najee's been a proven player. He's a former first round pick out of Alabama. He's been a decent back in the league. I think a fresh coat of paint for him will be good for Najee's career. And let's be honest, he's going to be 27 when the season starts next year. So I mean, he's still under 30, which is like that scary age that people talk about. So that's one guy. Another guy that I personally like, and I'm looking here at Spotrac. I know a lot of us look at that for the tracking information, but a guy that I saw on this list today that I thought would be a really good fit. And he's been a big one of my favorite underrated running backs in the league is Jeff Wilson Jr. I really like Jeff Wilson Jr. He's a guy. He's 29. He's had some injury issues, but here's the best part. He played his college ball at North Texas. I know a lot of our Cowboys Nation knows that area pretty well. Probably went to school there. Jeff Wilson Jr. He's a really good running back. He's one of those guys where I'm not expecting him to be Derrick Henry. I'm not expecting him to be Saquon Barkley and whatnot. But if you put him as the running back 2 behind Rico, I think you're in good hands. I've always liked him. Like, I loved him with the Niners. Like, he was like that bruising back that they had with the Niners. And then whenever he gets a chance, he's a bruiser for the Dolphins. So, Rico plays the same kind of style. So having 2 bruisers on the in the backfield where they could kind of change things up a little bit, and Jeff Wilson Jr. could spell him, that would be a really good fit. But obviously, there's other, the age thing, he's going to be, I think he's 29, if I'm not mistaken. So that might scare teams off. But I do think if the Cowboys are looking to get somebody in the bargain bin, which they usually do, that's what the Cowboys do. They shop at the bargain bin. Jeff Wilson Jr., he's a great option. I think he'd be a really quality back that can give you some quality carries throughout the season.
I think those are both solid pulls. It's funny, because you led with Najee Harris as like, this is a guy that I hate, and I don't necessarily hate him, but I was someone who said when the Steelers took him in the first round that it was not a good pick. I'm still on the train of it's not wise to use a first round pick on a running back.
Yeah.
It's not wise to spend a ton of money on the running back position. And with the Cowboys, with all the needs that they're going to have going into this draft, I think if you use your first round pick on an Ashton Genty, like, as great as Ashton Genty is, and I think he would do really well in Dallas, like, you can get a Jeff Wilson Jr. or somebody else in free agency for a really cheap price, and you're going to have similar production. Maybe not as explosive, but like, you'll still have really good production, and that's what, like, the Ravens and the Eagles this year. Obviously, Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley are both having phenomenal years. Unfortunately, the Cowboys saw both of them up close this season and did not do well against either of them. But you think back to the Ravens, a couple of years over the past few years, they were using guys like Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and they were still really good rushing the ball. And then you look at the Eagles, and they've had guys like DeAndre Swift, they've had Miles Sanders, Wendell Smallwood, like, all these guys that aren't necessarily big names, but they're productive. And it's funny because those 2 teams were kind of like proof in the pudding if you don't necessarily need a star running back. And then they both went out and got a star running back, and we're still really good at running the ball. I think the Cowboys would be smart to take a similar approach, what they did this past year, of not shelling out big money, not drafting a running back high. I think this draft class is also pretty stacked at the running back position. Obviously, Genty, we've talked about Cam Scadaboo. I think he would be a phenomenal fit in Dallas. There's guys like Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech, Jaden Ott out of California.
Don't forget about my guy Nick Singleton. I'm telling you, go watch the tape. Go get it.
Trayvon Henderson out of Ohio State. We'll get into more of those names as we get formally into draft season in a week or so.
Yeah, soon enough.
But I think this is going to be a really loaded draft class for a running back position. So, if you get Jeff Wilson, or if you get some other guy in free agency, even if you get Najee Harris on a really cheap deal, like, that'd be, I think, a really good value signing. But you can also find a guy on day 2, early day 3 of this draft that's going to be a difference maker too. I would like to see Rico Dowdle brought back. I think he's probably priced himself out of the Cowboys range, unless he decides to give him a loyalty discount, which, depending on what happens with the head coach and the offensive play caller and things like that, he might not be willing to do. But what this ultimately brings me to my New Year's resolution, because as much as I think the Cowboys do need to address the running back position in a way more meaningful than what they did this past offseason, I think ultimately it's not going to make a difference unless you have changes on the offensive line. And I kept this intentionally vague because there's a few different questions with the offensive line, and it's not entirely clear which direction the Cowboys might go. I've already voiced my opinion that I think they should move Tyler Guyton back to right tackle, which is his natural spot. I don't know why they've been rotating him in and out at left tackle with first Awesome Richards and then Chuma Edoga doesn't make sense to me. Like, let him play, see what you've got. But either way, put him back at right tackle. We've seen some flashes there from him in terms of his athleticism, his physicality. Put him back at the spot he's comfortable in. Move Terrence Steele inside to right guard. I think that's going to clear up a lot of his issues in pass protection. And now you actually have a hole at right guard, assuming, of course, that Zach Martin is not playing for the Cowboys next year, which it seems like everything is pointing to that direction, whether or not he comes back for another year of playing football. Then that begs the question of what you do at left tackle. Personally, I think it's going to be kind of the same question that we had last year of Tyler Smith, or if you get a really good guy you like in the draft. There's some good left tackles in this draft that might be available wherever they end up picking. But I'm also very okay with just moving Tyler Smith to left tackle, letting him, train and get ready for that position, and then having a battle between TJ Bass and Brock Hoffman for left guard. May the best man win. I've seen enough from both of those guys to like their upside, and between the two of those, if one of them wins out, I think that gives you a pretty solid starting five. I think there's also potentially, regardless of what happens as head coach, there might be a change at the offensive line coach position. Mike Solari, in my opinion, Mike Solari's been a pretty good coach, but there is a lot of hate out there for the job Mike Solari has done. People that are smarter than me suggest that he's a bad offensive line coach. So I have to take their word for it. They know more about offensive line play than me. But at the same time, I look at this, I see the way that Tyler Smith grew under Solari's watch, and the way that Cooper Beebe's grown this year as a rookie under his watch. The way that guys like Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass have grown this year with him as the offensive line coach. But at the same time, Solari's been doing this for a long time. I mean, he was part of the Cowboys coaching staff when Tom Landry was still around. I mean, that was early on in his career, but he's been around for a long time. So even if the Cowboys don't fire him outright or just like let his contract expire, whatever, there's also a real possibility he just decides, hey, I want to retire, like it's my time. And so with changes on the offensive line coach, that could be the change. Maybe there's a change in technique that helps out a guy like Tyler Guyton, whatever it may be. Or obviously, if there's a head coach change, then you have a new offensive play caller, probably going to have a new offensive line coach as well. Either way, though, I think the offensive line at this point has been kind of ravaged by injuries the last month or so. And I think they've done pretty well, all things considered. But if you're going to have this offense playing it the way that it was last year when Dak was a MVP runner-up, you got to get that offensive line in better shape. We know they've got a guy in Tyler Smith. We know they've got a guy in Cooper Beebe. Beyond that, there's a lot of questions. And I want to see some sort of change, some sort of improvement there.
Yeah, you and me are about, I'd say we're about 85, 90% on the same page with the offensive line. So like everything you said, I'm not opposed to any of that whatsoever. I think you and I both agree. I kind of did the thumbs up there when you mentioned Tyler Guyton moving over to right tackle. I've been on that same train for a while as well. And then kicking Terrence Steele inside, assuming Zach Martin is no longer in Dallas. And then I also agree, to an extent that, you can move Tyler Smith out to left tackle. And I think he'd be good, good there as well. Obviously, he's a really good left guard. The only thing, and here's the thing. I like, me, I'm a big TJ Bass guy. I mean, I wrote, I wrote a great piece on him before he was a known commodity. So I'm a huge TJ Bass guy. Brock Hoffman's a dog. I like him. I think he's just a tough dude that you want on your team. He's like, just at the Philly game, he was embracing the booze and like, come on, bring it on. I love that kind of attitude, and he's the kind of guy you want on your team. So I like both those guys. But for me personally, if there's a guy that's almost like a can't miss offensive line prospect that falls to you in say we're at 12, 14, somewhere in there, wherever it's all going to fall at this point. If somebody falls, that's a really, a guy that most people in the scouting realm are like, yeah, he's going to be a legit all pro. And then, he's a sure thing at say left tackle or a guard. You take the guy at that point, because to me, great offensive linemen don't grow on trees. So if you find a left tackle that, maybe you had a top 5 grade on, he falls to you in the teens, so to speak, I think you take him. Same thing with guard. If you see somebody in the draft, which I know we're going to get into that down the line, if you see somebody that's a really good guard prospect as well, or somebody who's a tackle right now that can move into guard, like like what Atlanta did most recently with Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse. He was a great tackle at Syracuse, and then he's been a solid guard for them. So you can find one of those guys.
You could have mentioned Zach Martin, who played tackle in college and then moved to guard.
I know.
But you had to go with your Syracuse guy.
Of course I did. I had to go with my Syracuse guy. I got to throw some. I got to put Syracuse on there. Some way, shape, or form. But the point is, if you can find if a really good offensive line prospect falls to you, at that point, I think you got to take them. I think at that point you take them, and then you have depth. You have a TJ Bass. You have a Brock Hoffman, which makes you 7 deep. At the offensive line, that's a great problem to have. So that's one option. If the Cowboys opt to not do it and go more your route and go with a Brock Hoffman or a TJ Bass, I'm not opposed to it. So that's why I'm kind of like 85-90% along the same lines as you. But I'll tell you right now, don't be surprised if they do take an offensive lineman where they're at, because if Genty goes early, there's no reason for them to take Genty, another running back that's not Genty. I haven't looked at the draft boards or anything yet, but I don't think you take anybody else in the first round at running back that's not Ashton Genty at this point. So if an offensive lineman's there, I think you might have to take them.
Now, to transition into your second New Year's resolution for the Cowboys, the other argument would be, well, if you take an offensive lineman in the first round, first of all, they've done that a lot recently. They took Tyler Smith and they took Tyler Guyton.
Not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing by any stretch,
Nope.
But at the same time, where are you maximizing your draft value versus your draft needs? And if you don't take an offensive line, or if you do take an offensive lineman at that first pick, there's probably a chance you're missing out on a really good receiver, which, as I understand it, that's also a position of importance for you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that you're spot on. I mean, depending on who's there. I know there's a kid from Arizona that I know you know him very well. With being a Wildcat, he's really good. How do you say his name? I'm very bad at pronouncing it. I don't want to butcher it.
It's pronounced didn't do anything against the Sun Devils.
Oh, that's nice. I figured you were going to.
Teteroa McMillan is his name.
Teteroa McMillan.
He had a phenomenal year, except for when he played Arizona State.
That's all right. I mean, we'll give him a free pass. I mean, he makes phenomenal grabs. I've seen his highlights.
Not everybody can perform against the soon-to-be national champion Sun Devils, so it's fine.
It's going to be rich. Oh, man. If to all of our listeners and viewers out there, if Arizona State somehow pulls off the miracle and does it, it's going to be a very interesting podcast over the next few months.
Oh, we're not even going to talk Cowboys. It's just going to be nonstop highlights of Sam Levitt and Cam Scattaboo and all these guys. You're going to find all about Shimon Mateer, all these guys. Like, you're going to know Arizona State's roster top to bottom if that happens. And if they lose, then whatever. We don't have to talk about it.
Here's what I would say. Like, I mean, if Cowboys went crazy and moved up to 1, which I'm just saying they're not going to probably do that. If they want Travis Hunter bad enough, they're going to have to go up to 1 and get him, because he's probably the best player in the draft. But here's the thing. He's probably playing corner more so than receiver. I think he's going to take the Deion Sanders approach, which obviously it's kind of funny that all ties in because that's his current coach, where Deion Sanders was primarily a corner and then he played some receiver. So it wouldn't make sense for the Cowboys to go up and get somebody like that, even though he's I think he's a once in a decade kind of player. So for me, I would go the route, and I'm looking here and looking at the free agent market. I mean, a guy that I really like, and he's still young. He's going to be 26 next season. And here's the thing: it's going to cost a lot of money. Let's be honest here. He's going to cost a lot of money, but the Cincinnati Bengals can't. They're not going to pay both. They're not going to pay Jamar Chase and the guy that I like here, T. Higgins. They're not going to pay them both. So I would love to see the Cowboys go load up at receiver. Let's have an arms race against the Philadelphia Eagles. And let's get ourselves a T. Higgins, CeeDee Lamb combination, because let's be honest, Jake Ferguson, who I know you haven't been as high on this year, he's not a good number 2 option in the passing game when CeeDee Lamb's available. I think we need to get a viable stud receiver, number 2 receiver. and a T. Higgins would be a great fit. It all comes down to dollars and cents and if they would actually do it. Now, there's a couple other guys out there as well. I mean, you could also, kick the tires on, I believe Amari Cooper's got his contracts coming up, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that'd be crazy.
I
Stephon
think
Diggs.
I would be surprised if that does happen, for the record, just because the way that he left, it wasn't exactly on the best of terms. It would be surprising if that did happen. But
hey,
the guy
there's
dream.
another. I mean, hey, Stephon Diggs. I mean, he's, I believe he's a free agent this coming year. I mean, I know his brother's been trying to get
any family ties to the Cowboys by any chance?
That's a good question.
Maybe a nephew or something distant.
It's his brother.
Cousin, removed.
It's his little brother. Trayvon. I mean, Trayvon's been trying to push him to come to Dallas for years, so that might make sense. Another guy who's often injured, but when he's on the field, he's a really good player, is Chris Godwin. I really like Chris Godwin as a player. I think he'd be somebody that, I know he's going to be, I believe he's going to be 29, coming into the 2025 season. So Chris Godwin's a guy that when he does play, he could be a really good number 2. And I don't think he would cost you as much as a T. Higgins, so that's possible. He also went to the school that my wife loves very much, which is Penn State. So, I'm sure she'd be happy to have another Nittany Lion on the Cowboys, because the Cowboys have had a really good history of drafting Nittany Lions. So, if they could bring in a guy that's not a draftable player from the Nittany Lions, but a guy in free agency that has ties to Penn State, I think Chris Godwin would be a good answer. If they don't go through the draft and all that stuff, I could see Chris Godwin. Honestly, it'd be kind of cool.
Well, I love Chris Godwin. I think he's a phenomenal player. The only issue I have with Chris Godwin, aside from my belief that there's no way Tampa Bay lets him walk.
I agree with that, yeah.
I mean, he can't only play in the slot, but he is very much at his best when he plays in the slot. He's one of the top slot receivers in the NFL. One of the guys ahead of him, one of the few guys ahead of him, is CeeDee Lamb. And so that creates a problem of, well, if you have Chris Godwin and you have CeeDee Lamb, who plays in the slot, who doesn't? Obviously, it's a good problem to have if you've got two of the top 5 slot receivers in the NFL. But I think probably when looking at receiver options, probably the best way to go about it is saying, all right, CeeDee's going to be in the slot majority of the time. Let's find guys that can reliably play outside. I think that was a big reason why they went after Brandon Cooks when they did, because even though he's a smaller guy, he's primarily played outside. Obviously, that hasn't worked out as well as everyone thought that it would. Injuries were a bit of a thing this year, but I think that's generally what they should be looking for. T. Higgins, to your point, would fit that bill. He's very much got that prototype outside receiver kind of guy.
What about Nuke? What about Nuke Hopkins? Do you think they would kick the tires on a 33-year-old Hopkins?
Maybe. I mean, they poked around a couple of years ago and didn't end up pulling the trigger. I think he's I think he still fits into that same bubble of like T.Y. Hilton a few years ago when they brought him in, and Odell Beckham Jr. of like, he's a name, but he's not a difference maker anymore. Like, not saying Hopkins doesn't have any ability. He very clearly still does, but he's not the guy he once was. And in 2025, DeAndre Hopkins is not the answer to your problems offensively.
Let me ask you this: would you pay T. Higgins? Would you open the Brinks for him?
As long as I paid Micah first.
Obviously I'd pay Micah first.
But also, I mean, I think T. Higgins is probably going to get, if the Bengals don't franchise him, I think T. Higgins is probably going to get he's going to be one of the highest paid receivers on the open market. And even if the Cowboys were an aggressive team, I'm not sure that they even have the cap space to do that. And even if they do, and they were willing to pay that, which they're not, I'm not sure that I'm not sure it's the best investment, because then you're not going to have a lot left over to fill all your other holes, which they will have several of.
What if they can make it work at like, say, 21 million a year? Would you kick the tires on that?
If you were to tell me like, hey, you can wave a magic wand, you can get T. Higgins and financially it all works, like, I'm 100% in. Like, I love the player. I think he'd be an incredible fit. I just think dollars and cents, it's not going to work out because he's already. I mean, he's the reason that the Bengals, if they do let him go, it's going to be because they're already paying their quarterback, they're already paying their receiver. They don't have the money to do it.
Well,
Cowboys are paying their quarterback, Cowboys are paying their receiver, and they're about to be
True.
paying Micah Parsons a whole boatload of money. So I love the pull. I think if that happened, like, you've got one of the best offenses on Madden for sure. But I think in reality, knowing the way this front office works, knowing the realities of the contracts that they're going to sign in the next year or so, it's not realistic. But I would be ecstatic if it happened.
I will say, and the reason why I say right around 21 million, because right now, obviously things can change. Looking at Spotrac going into the off season, they're going to have about 19 to 20 million dollars in cap space. I know they still got to sign some players and this and that and draft picks, but the Cowboys have done those the salary cap gymnastics to maybe make something work like that. I'm not saying it's likely to happen, but it sure would be interesting and sure would be darn cool to see CeeDee Lamb and T Higgins on the same field together. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it would be a lot of fun. I'm not sure it happens, but I think your head's in the right spot for sure.
What about Stephon Diggs? Do you think Stephon Diggs? You think at this point, you think this, at 30, he's 31 going on 32. You think Stephon Diggs wants to come play with his brother?
I think he does. I think he'll entertain it. But again, just like DeAndre Hopkins, like in 2025, I don't think Stephon Diggs like moves the needle for you. All due respect to Mr. Diggs, but I mean he's coming off another injury. He's got a lot of miles on him, and also like we know one of the problems he had in Buffalo was there was this not really a feud because like they were on the same page, but a lot of times it felt like if Josh Allen isn't feeding Diggs enough, then he gets upset, and he wanted to be the top guy. And I mean, he wasn't going to be the top guy in Houston, but you never even really had that issue because Nico Collins was out, and then right after Nico Collins came back, then Diggs went down. He's not going to be the top guy in Dallas, no matter
Obviously.
what.
No doubt.
So is he open to that? Is he going to be fine with that? But also, I don't think obviously Stephon Diggs is still a net positive for the Cowboys, but I don't think that if they go out and get Stephon Diggs tomorrow, that any of us are going to be saying all right, receiver group is upgraded, done. We got that taken care of. I think honestly, I agree that there's definitely going to be some options in free agency, but I also think that there's going to be some really good options in this draft. You mentioned McMillan. I think he's probably out of their range at this point. I think he's probably a lock to be a top 10 pick. Could be the top receiver drafted, depending on how they announce the Travis Hunter pick. But I think Luther Burden out of Missouri is a guy I've got my eye on. I think he would be a phenomenal complement for CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
Big question is going to be, is he in their range? But that brings me to my New Year's resolution, which is similar. I was a little bit more vague and just said they need to have major upgrades at the pass catcher spots. And you alluded to it a little bit already. I think, and I'll stress this, I'm not saying that this is what they should do right now, but I think that they should at least entertain the idea of finding a replacement for Jake Ferguson. And I'm not saying bench Jake Ferguson. I'm not saying cut him, trade him, or anything like that. But the reality is, I mean, this was last year. Jake Ferguson had his coming out party, and everyone was like, "Oh, he's a really good tight end." He stepped into the tight end one role and looked really great. And this year has not lived up to the hype for him. I know he had some injuries here and there, missed a couple of games. But the reality is, I mean, he didn't get open very much. Right now, he's got 57 catches, only 482 yards, hasn't caught a touchdown at all this year. And he's third on the team in receiving behind Jalen Tolbert. We've talked about Jalen Tolbert on this show often enough for you to know that, I mean, as good as Jalen Tolbert has been, by the way, he now leads the team in touchdown receptions after catching one against the Eagles, which I think is noteworthy. But, I mean, for who Jake Ferguson was coming into this season, he should be at least on par, if not surpassing Jalen Tolbert in terms of production. Ferguson's got 482 receiving yards. Tolbert's got 512 on almost 15 fewer catches than Ferguson. He also had a fumble in this game. It's the second time that he's lost a fumble in his career. Both of those came this year. Again, by no means am I saying Ferguson's washed up and done, but if you get into the draft, or if there's a tight end in free agency that would be a meaningful upgrade, and you have somebody available, and you're going to have, like we were talking pre-show about the Raiders, because 2 years ago they drafted Michael Mayer in the first round, who was a highly touted tight end prospect, and then this past year they draft Brock Bowers. They didn't necessarily care that Michael Mayer had just been their first round pick. They said, well, as good as Michael Mayer is, Brock Bowers is Brock freaking Bowers. And he just broke Mike Ditka's record for rookie tight end receiving yards or catches. I don't remember which one it was, but he broke a Mike Ditka record that has stood for a very long time.
Yeah.
And as much as it sucks for Michael Mayer, who had a pretty good rookie season, they made the absolutely correct move because Brock Bowers is that special. So I don't know that there's definitely not a Brock Bowers. Actually, I could tell you that with certainty. There's not a Brock Bowers in this draft class. But if there's a guy that's going to be a major upgrade at tight end, I think you take him. Same way if there's a guy who's a significant upgrade at receiver. Same way if there's a guy at running back who is, again, this is not talking about necessarily first round, but if there's a guy that's going to be a huge upgrade to your pass game at running back, who can be the Darren Sproles that people thought Deuce Vaughn was going to be, that I thought Deuce Vaughn was going to be. Like what we need right now is pass catching options for Dak Prescott when he comes back. Because right now it's CeeDee Lamb. We know he's got chemistry with Jalen Tolbert and he believes in him. But after that, like, Jalen Tolbert's a little shaky. Jake Ferguson's a little shaky. Brandon Cooks his contract is up after this year. And then you got a bunch of question marks. I know you believe in Ryan Flournoy. Chris Holling believes in Jalen Brooks. We haven't seen a whole lot from either of them, especially with Dak Prescott throwing the ball. Jonathan Mingo is there. Cooper Rush doesn't know where he is, but we know he's there. I think you need to upgrade the pass catching spots, and whether that's a tight end and Jake Ferguson ends up dropping down to tight end too, I think you can't be afraid of having that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's two guys, and of course, it's two schools that I'm very familiar with. Watching a lot of ball. First I got to shout out Rondé Gaston from Syracuse. He's a top 5 tight end in this draft class. He's probably going to be a 3rd or 4th round pick, in my opinion. And I think that would be a guy, if the Cowboys were looking, they've done pretty well in the 4th round with tight ends over the years. So I mean, that could be a good spot. If you want to go a little bit earlier than that, another day 2. I don't even know if he might go day. I don't think he's going day 1 actually. I think he'll be a day 2. Is Tyler Warren from Penn State. I haven't looked at the draft boards lately, but Tyler Warren's a beast. I think he's a really good player. He's one of their biggest weapons at Penn State. That's why that's one of the reasons why they've gotten as far as they have, and they're going to be playing, in the college. They're playing in the college football playoff is because of a guy like Tyler Warren. So if a guy like that falls in the right spot, you probably have to take, you take him and that upgrades your position. So I mean, I see where you're at with that. I think, I've had to pump the brakes a little bit on Tolbert. I think he's, I want, to be fair, in the, preseason, I wanted him, bagging groceries, so to speak, not somewhere else. That's fine. That was my analysis coming into the year, and I'm glad he proved me wrong. And that's the thing. At the end of the day, I want these guys, when I'm critical, I want them to prove me wrong, because that means they're making a difference on this Dallas Cowboy football team. So I think, kudos to Jalen Tolbert for proving me wrong and some doubters wrong. And I think he's had a really good season. And I think he's a solid 3, solid 4, receiver, third, 4th receiver on this team. And that again, that goes back to my point where we need a receiver too. And I don't think Jalen Tolbert's the answer there. I think he could be a solid receiver 3 as his, peak. So, I think tight end's a good place. I think receiver 2 is a good place. So at the end of the day, the Cowboys got to upgrade the pass catching department, because it can't all be CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying about Tolbert. I mean, I think he's cemented himself this year as your wide receiver 3 next year. Obviously, if you get a Luther Burden and you can get T. Higgins or something like that, Again, I don't think that's going to happen. But if you get two great receivers out, next to CeeDee Lamb, you're more than happy to bump Tolbert down to number 4. But I mean, he's shown a lot through this quarterback change. He's still been productive. He's been a red zone threat. I mean, he like I said, he leads the team in touchdowns now. Obviously, that's influenced by CeeDee Lamb not playing this past game. But again, first game without Lamb there. And he was tied with him, and then first game without Lamb there, Tolbert passes him. And 2 weeks ago now, he tore a ligament in his hand, and they stitched it up, and he was back out there playing. So he's got the toughness down, and we know from some of the throws that Dak Prescott sent his way last year and this year, Dak trusts him. So you want your quarterback to have a receiver out there who he trusts. We know he trusts CD. We know he trusts Tolbert. Go get him another difference maker. Like T. Higgins, like Luther Burden, whoever it may be. And Tyler Warren is a great pull too. I've not watched enough Penn State this year just because I've been so obsessed with Arizona State having a great year. But I've seen some clips here and there of Tyler Warren, and from what I've seen, I'd take him in the first round. He would be a legitimate upgrade over Jake Ferguson. And again, maybe Jake Ferguson goes into this offseason and is like, hey, look, I didn't have the year I expected to. Like, I'm gonna dedicate everything I have to like improving, getting better, and he comes back next year and is the guy he was last year. By no means, just like you said about proving me wrong, like I'm still on the Jake Ferguson train. I still think he can be a really good tight end. He just wasn't this year, and they really needed him to. So if it's bringing in a guy to stoke that competition, or if it's, whatever it is, you got to give Dak more weapons. Because we also know that we just saw that proof this year. They don't necessarily need a star player at running back. They can, it took them a little bit to figure out the run game, but once they committed to Rico Dowdle, they had a good running game. And we know that they can figure that part out. But they can't really figure out not having any answer outside of CeeDee Lamb in the pass game. So those are our New Year's resolutions. And just like all New Year's resolutions, they're sure to happen just because we said that that's what we plan to do. It's sure to happen. Surely the Cowboys will take notes. As we get ready to wind down, looking around the NFL, it was an interesting week of NFL action. We had games on Wednesday, on Thursday, several games Saturday. Just about all of them were duds. It was not the best slate of NFL games. We did get an overtime thriller in between there on accident, but and then the games on Sunday. I mean, not a whole lot of really exciting action. The Giants came into Sunday as the leading team to get the first overall draft pick. Shedeur Sanders even went into Colorado's bowl game, and he was wearing New York Giants cleats, a clear sign of like, hey, I want to play for the Giants. Giants need a quarterback. They got the first overall pick. Come pick me. And then immediately the Giants were like, well, we got to drop that pick down a few spots on the draft board.
Yeah.
So
it was an interesting slate of games. I mean, honestly, probably the most exciting game was probably our Sunday night game between the Commanders and Falcons. I mean, that went into overtime, and Commanders they pulled it out. They got lucky. They didn't. So Atlanta doesn't have Brandon Aubrey. So 56 yards for some kickers is still hard. It's hard for.
To be fair, Atlanta didn't even have Younghoe Koo, who is their starting kicker.
Yeah,
it was funny. I was watching that game, and I don't follow the Falcons that closely. I didn't know that Younghoe Koo was out, but I know Younghoe Koo is a great kicker.
Yeah.
And as they were like going down the field, I was like, oh, okay, they need to get to like maybe the 40 to be in Koo's range, and then it shows Riley Patterson, who was their backup, warming up, and I was like, oh, they don't have Koo. Okay, well that changes things. You got to get closer now. And my wife can attest to this. Not that she's going to, or publicly going to make some formal declaration, but as soon as I saw that, I said, well, with Riley Patterson, you can't be kicking anything beyond 50 yards. And then what do you know? They go down and attempt a 56-yarder, and he gets it right on line. And I was so sure he had it. And then at the last second, it just bloop, drops down, and he misses it.
Yeah. He would have barely made that from 50. It wasn't. I think he was one. He's the type of kicker. I think he could make it from 56, but it'd have to be a low liner, so to speak.
Yeah.
He'd have to hit a line drive essentially, which means you have a higher probability of getting a block because you get some 6'6", 6'7" guy going up the middle with his paw up in the air. Those low kicks are they have a high probability of being blocked. So I think he kicked it higher than he wanted to because he wants to get it over that line, but at the same time he didn't have enough of the distance, so to speak. And it was a straight on kick. Like, it looked good from the camera angle that we could see at first. You're like, oh, he's looking good, and it like falls at like the tip of the end zone. It's like, yeah. He didn't have any distance on that. It was it was definitely an interesting game. I mean, Michael Penix, I mean, he was one of my favorite players coming out this past year's draft. Not only is he a lefty like myself, so like shout out to a fellow lefty. So but I've always liked his game. I've always been a fan of his, and I followed his career, his 6-year career in college. I remember watching him at Indiana. There used to be a player there a few years ago at Indiana that went to school here locally, in high school. So I followed him. I got to know some of the family members of that particular person. He ended up playing at Indiana. I'm trying to put it all together. I think they played for a little bit together there. So I followed Indiana just enough because I wanted to see how the local kid did, so to speak there. And that's how I saw Michael Penix for the first time. So shout out to him. And obviously, shout out to Jalen, Jaden Daniels. I mean, that dude is so good.
To your point about Penix, I mean, we were on the live draft show when they took Michael Penix right after signing Kirk Cousins to that big deal, and we were all, just like the rest of NFL Twitter, we were all in shock. We were like, "What are you doing? This makes no sense." And here they are, and they've benched Kirk Cousins after some really poor play, and Michael Penix is in there, and he lost this game. But he looked darn good doing it. I think the Falcons, obviously, it remains to be seen what they're going to do with Kirk Cousins and all of his contract and the cap ramifications of cutting him. But Michael Penix looks like the real deal. I mean, he won his first start. He went toe-to-toe with Jaden Daniels, who I think is probably the lock at this point for Offensive Rookie of the Year. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he gets MVP votes. I'm not saying he should be the MVP. Yeah, I think that's a two-way race between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Yeah. But, I mean, you talk about Jaden Daniels, how many times he's thrown a game winner, how many times he has willed this team back into the game, just how much he does for this offense. Yeah. And you look at the guys he's doing it with. Obviously, Terry McLaurin's a great player. But then you've got like a 90-year-old Zach Ertz. You've got Olamide Zaccheaus, who most people didn't even know how to pronounce his name until Sunday night.
He's a journeyman player. He's a journeyman. He's been
he's a good player. He's a good player, but he's not. Yeah. When Jaden Daniels got drafted to the Commanders, you weren't sitting there going like, man, his connection with Olamide Zaccheaus is going to be chef's kiss. So he's doing it with not a very good offensive line, with not the best, crop of pass catchers.
Outside of Terry McLaurin, I think
outside of Terry McLaurin, who's really good, but I think again, I don't think he should be the MVP, but I think he at least belongs in the conversation, just like Cam Scadaboo belonged at the New York celebration show for the Heisman. Both of them played at one point or another at Arizona State, not at the same time. Both of them are phenomenal players in my book. And speaking of the Commanders, they're next up on the schedule for the Cowboys. Yes. Of course, with that win over Atlanta, they clinched a playoff spot, but they have something to play for. Right now they're the 7th seed. They could move up to the 6th seed with a win over the Cowboys. So Dan Quinn came out and said, we're playing to win in this game. Meanwhile, the Cowboys, I mean, they literally have nothing to play for. That's one of the reasons why they decided to shut down CeeDee Lamb. Going up against the Commanders, obviously, like, you want to win your division games. They already beat the Commanders earlier this year, so they know they can do it. It would be nice to end the season with a win, end things on a high note. But at the same time, like, I know you want to see Trey Lance in this game.
Yes.
I know you want to see Ryan Flournoy in this game.
I do.
I believe Mike McCarthy said on Monday that they haven't made any of those decisions just yet. about like who's going to play, who's not going to play, how they're going to handle these things. I personally don't really care at this point who plays and who doesn't, because the reality is we're not going to learn anything. Like if Trey Lance comes out and plays this game, we're not really going to learn anything. Like if he comes out and plays well, it's like, okay, you had one game against the Commanders with, a primarily backups at receiver, a few backups starting on the offensive line. Like it's if he plays poorly, it's not going to tell us anything. If he plays great, it's not like they're going to suddenly say, okay, let's give this guy a huge extension. He's the future of our franchise now. And I don't think that it doesn't move the needle one way or the other. I still think unless Cooper Rush gets a really ridiculous offer from some other team in free agency, he's back next year as the backup. And I think that's totally fair given how he's played. I don't think Trey Lance is coming back at this point, and there's no real reason for him to. And I don't think that he gains anything. I don't think the Cowboys stand to gain anything from playing him or from playing Deuce Vaughn or from, getting, Kalen Carson and Keemon Hall in there at corner, whoever it may be. I don't see any real reason. I know you want to see the guys just to see the guys, and especially Trey Lance, but I don't think you don't actually gain anything.
Well, here's the thing with the whole Trey Lance chatter. I think the Cowboys have been slow playing the Trey Lance experiment. Of course, they do it all the way to the end. Obviously, it's what they do. And I said it. I put it on X, Twitter, and said it. The Jones are slow. They're essentially slow playing this, so they can. It wouldn't surprise me if he has a decent game against the Commanders this week, and they'll still be able to re-sign Trey Lance for a super low price, because that's what they're doing at this point. If they're going to bring Trey Lance back, they're going to be like, well, the rest of the league hasn't really seen much from him. We know what we have in him because we've seen him practice. And then say he plays well against the Commanders this week, just hypothetically speaking. Let's offer him a low ball deal and bring him back bring him back on the roster. I think that's the thinking. I don't think someone's going to blow the doors off on Trey Lance to give him a big contract. I just don't see that. So I think Trey Lance has a better chance of being on this team next year than Cooper Rush. And I think and here's the thing, and that's not because I like Trey Lance. Obviously, I want to see more Trey Lance than I do Cooper Rush. But I think Cooper Rush has shown a lot of teams that he's a very viable backup. And I think a team out there that has a superstar quarterback but doesn't have anybody in the in the background, that, like, say your superstar player goes down, you're giving the reins to somebody who's not really good, or can't keep the team above 500. Then someone might open up the checkbook a little bit more than the Cowboys and take Cooper Rush elsewhere. It wouldn't surprise me, like even like a team, I don't know, for example, look what the Chiefs did in recent years with like a Chad Henne, with as a backup, or the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills could look at a guy like Cooper Rush as well. I know they have Mitch Trubisky there, I believe, at this stage, but there's a lot of teams out there that are going to look at Cooper Rush and be like, I'll pay a little bit extra for a guy like him, because if my quarterback goes down, I know he's gonna if our quarterback goes down for 4 to 6 weeks, he's probably going to keep us above 500. And then when our superstar comes back, we're still in the playoff hunt. So I think don't be surprised if Cooper Rush has a decent market. I don't think he's going to get a starter job, obviously. I don't think that's the case. But one of the most important positions on an NFL team is the backup quarterback. A lot of people forget about that because they're not on the field all the time. But they're the most important position when that superstar quarterback goes down, because you need somebody in there to steady the ship. And I think a guy like Cooper Rush has proven throughout this season that he might have priced himself out of being a Cowboy next year. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
I just think back to the last time that Cooper Rush played a significant period of time a couple of years ago. And, he did better in those games, had a better record. And, like, everyone was talking about Cooper Rush. And his contract was up that year too. And, like, nobody touched him. And then he came back to the Cowboys. And I think it's probably going to be kind of the same conversation.
He's played. I think his stats. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think he's looked better as an NFL player over this stretch.
His highs this year have been higher than his highs were last year, but his lows have been lower as well.
That's what you're going to get with a backup. He was
very consistent in 2022, and nobody wanted to touch him. and he came back to the Cowboys. And I think, honestly, I think at this point, it's just it's a familiarity, it's a loyalty thing. I mean, this is his second stint in Dallas. Keep in mind, he was here before, and then he left, and then he came back. And I think at this point, he's just like, look, I've gotten the chance to show what I can do in Dallas. I've got a good gig here. He knows the players. He knows the offense, assuming that doesn't change in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. But I mean, I think, like you said, unless somebody comes in and offers him a huge contract, which I don't see happening, I don't see a chance that he doesn't come back as the QB2, which then at that point, there's no point in paying to have your QB3 who's never going to touch the ball. But again, to your point, if he does get that bag, first of all, happy for him. Congratulations. Second of all, maybe you do bring Trey Lance back at that point and, get somebody else and have a competition for QB2, whatever you do. But either way, as it relates to this week, I mean, if they want to play Trey Lance, I'm going to be like, cool, let's see what he's got. And if they don't play Trey Lance, I'm going to be like, it wasn't going to change anything.
Here's what I'll say with the Cooper Rush part of it. Like, I think he's played well enough where I wouldn't be surprised if one of those really savvy franchises out there, I'm not like, I wouldn't say the Steelers, because the Steelers, they're a savvy franchise. They've done really well. They've already got that position pretty much, covered up for a bit, I think. But even like a Ravens type team. I mean, I know he's not the mobile player that Lamar Jackson is, but an organization that's as smart and as savvy as like the Ravens and the Steelers, they could look at a Cooper Rush and be like, we don't expect him to play, but God forbid our guy goes down. I think we'll be all right with this guy. And I think I wouldn't, and I'm not saying it's definitely happening, but it wouldn't surprise me if somebody comes and offers him a decent contract that the Cowboys are like, well, we're trying to pay other guys. We can't afford you, so go get your bag. You know what I mean? Like, I could see that, and I the reason why I lean more towards Trey versus Cooper at this point is I feel like the Cowboys, they'll get a better deal with Trey Lance than Cooper Rush, I think, at this point.
But they'll probably get a worse quarterback. Is the thing.
They'll get a developmental quarterback who's still younger.
Which is not what you want as your backup.
I know, I get that, but I don't think you're at this stage of the game. I don't think you're, if you're choosing between, let's see, we got to have enough money to sign, say, Micah Parsons to a deal, but we have just enough money. Like, it's like, well, we can't give Micah a certain amount of money because we got to pay Cooper Rush. I don't think they do that. You know what I'm saying?
I don't think that's happening at all. I don't think anybody's having that conversation.
But no, I'm saying from a salary cap perspective, I think they're looking at it like, okay, we got to pay Micah. I don't know if they're going to pay Tank, Cavante. They're going to look. I don't think Cooper is going to be as much of a priority as people think. I don't see it. And I could see.
Well, he's not going to be a priority, but I mean, he's probably not going to be. I don't think the teams are going to be like handing out cash at him left and right to where they have to make it a priority.
But I think he might. It's possible that he gets a better offer elsewhere. It wouldn't surprise me. I'm not saying like if Cooper Rush is back next year, I'm fine with it. Like I've come to the grips where I'm like, all right, like Cooper Rush has been a solid backup. So if the price is right, you keep him,
Yeah.
But if somebody offers him a little bit more money, I think he's gone.
I think we're saying the same thing here. But of course, going into the final week of the season, it's always nice to get one last Trey Lance debate in there.
Of course.
And we've certainly had plenty of them. But I just think we're not gonna see a whole lot of him in this game. Even if we do, I don't think he's gonna I don't think it changes the conversation either way. And either way, we're still gonna be able to walk out of this saying, man, that was a really stupid trade, giving up a 4th-round pick for Trey Lance and then playing him all of 40 snaps in his entire time in Dallas. And then, he'll walk in free agency. Then we get to move on to the next stupid trade to overanalyze, which is Jonathan Mingo. Welcome to the Dallas Cowboys, Jonathan Mingo. We're happy to have you here.
Here's the other thing too, and going back to the Trey Lance real quick, and I'm not going on the train.
That's gotta be your catchphrase.
Here's the thing: the move for Trey Lance. If you look at it in hindsight, the Cowboys could have had Bucky Irving. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, I mean that's my point. If if you're going to give up a 4th-round pick, give the kid more run. And instead of if in hindsight, it's like, okay, you barely played this kid. You should have kept the 4th and drafted Bucky Irving at that point.
Bucky Irving, by the way, who a couple years ago played his college ball at Oregon under offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham. Now the head coach at Arizona State, soon to be the youngest national champion head coach in college football history. I'm sure this is going to age like fine wine. On that note, we're going to wrap it up for this episode of the Writer's Block. The last episode of the Writer's Block in 2024. We will be talking to you next year, breaking down the final game of the Cowboys season, thankfully turning the page and getting into all sorts of conversations about coaches and free agents and draft and all of that. It's going to be fun. Off season and draft season is like my favorite time of the year, getting to like play GM myself. So I'm looking forward to it. I know a lot of other Cowboys fans are looking forward to this season finally being done for. And of course, here at the Writer's Block, we'll be covering all of it every week. So tune in next week, tune in next year for the Writer's Block. Signing off for Brandon Clements, I'm David Howman. Remember always, how about them Cowboys?